Ukraine says it will continue to work with the United States through all available channels, adding it's ready to sign the minerals deal with Washington at any time. The country's prime minister spoke earlier today and said that Kyiv has enough funds and liquidity to survive in current conditions this year. Take a listen.
We will continue to work with the US, with the US Congress, with President Trump's administration, with President Trump through all available diplomatic channels in a calm manner in order for Ukraine and the US to continue our fight for fair, long-lasting, stable peace in Ukraine and on the European continent.
We can now bring in Michael Borsickiw, Global Affairs Analyst and Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, who joins us from Kyiv. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today. We know how Friday's meeting in the Oval Office ended. Now we have this announcement from Washington overnight. Was this inevitable, in your opinion?
I think we expected it to come. The emergency summit in London on Sunday, I think was designed to expect the cessation, at least temporary, of American aid. The details are still a bit vague. For example, we do not know whether the Americans will halt intelligence sharing to the Ukrainians. That's very, very important, not only for striking inside Russia, not only for monitoring troop movements, but also, of course, incoming Russian missiles. And as for the Patriot missiles, my understanding is those will last until the end of this month, maybe into April. But if that system is not replaced quickly, maybe by European systems, Ukraine will be left very, very exposed.
Michael, you're in Kyiv, and given how this is how the Trump administration has chosen to react in the aftermath of that meeting in the Oval Office, is there any domestic pressure building up on Vladimir Zelensky to potentially change his tune or even apologize?
Yeah, actually, I'm in Odesa, but that's okay. I move around a lot. Yeah, you know, there is, I would say, quite a big percentage of people here who are in favor of Mr. Zelensky apologizing. There's a feeling that perhaps he wanted to save face, save the nation's face, but at the end of the day, what's really, really important is for the war to stop. And as the Prime Minister said this morning, Ukraine is the victim, not the aggressor. But, you know, I also watched that entire press conference with the Prime Minister, and there were many questions. And on at least one or two occasions, he was asked whether Mr. Zelensky will apologize to Trump in order to get the process restarted. And he didn't answer that question. And I thought that was quite interesting. I think for the time being, the Ukrainians are holding their ground and very much portraying a kind of stance that we can do this pretty much on our own, saying that, you know, American assistance is down to about 30%. There's a very robust drone manufacturing system here. A lot of the war is being conducted by high tech, not with tanks. So let's see where that goes.
Stay with us, Michael, because last night we had the U.S. Vice President who gave an interview to Fox News where he said Europe needs to get realistic on Ukraine. J.D. Vance signaling the Trump administration has left the door open to Vladimir Zelensky if he's willing to talk peace. Take a listen.
The president knows that, look, if you want real security guarantees, if you want to actually ensure that Vladimir Putin does not invade Ukraine again, the very best security guarantee is to give Americans economic upside in the future of Ukraine. This is not going to make anybody happy. The Russians are going to have to give up stuff. The Ukrainians are going to have to give up stuff. You can't come to the Oval Office and say, give us security guarantees. We won't even engage with you about what we're willing to give up. That's been the Ukrainian posture. When that posture changes, as President Trump said, when they're willing to talk peace, I think President Trump will be the first person to pick up the phone.
I'd like to bring in Michael Borsickiw in once again. Michael, if you heard there from J.D. Vance, it seems that the thinking in Washington, there has been a fundamental change since under the Trump administration. Europe has said it will stand by Ukraine, give Ukraine everything it needs, but will Europe have to ultimately get on board with Washington's thinking, or can Europe continue and fill the void?
Yeah, well, first of all, what you heard there was basically a hillbilly speaking. This is a new narrative coming from the White House where we're going to do things our way, and if need be, we will send gunboats, or if not that, we will send traders or merchants to mine your rare earth minerals or whatever. So it's a very greedy transactional approach to the world. As for Europe, I think the EU commissioner's chief statements today pledging hundreds of billions of euros was quite encouraging, but I think whether it's Mr. Macron or Mr. Starmer or others, is they need to really adopt a sense of urgency, because my big fear, knowing what we know of Mr. Putin, is he doesn't wait for others to act. He acts on his own, and he acts, this is very important, he acts when he sees weakness and a void, which is what's happening right now. There are no solid red lines right now being enforced by the Americans. So worst case scenario, where I'm sitting right now, it could be that the Russians make a play for Mykolaiv, further on into Odessa, even to Moldova, Transnistria, to link the Russian mainland with those parts. Worst case scenario, but we cannot rule it out.
But Michael, if you listen to that sound by J.D. Vance, in the administration's thinking, if you will, is that if America has an economic interest in Ukraine, then that would deter Russia from wanting to invade Ukraine down the line. This is what the administration seems to be thinking, not obviously what Ukrainian officials are thinking, nor American officials. Can the Trump administration be convinced otherwise?
Well, you know, if they really were keen on that economic agreement, they would have signed it. The first, few minutes of the meeting in the Oval Office, which was pretty calm and constructive. But then I think what happened there is they saw this agreement being too diluted. They gave away too many concessions, perhaps, and it wasn't a deal that Mr. Trump could say is the best deal in the world and throw it to his base and say, look how powerful I am. Secondly, and I think this is very important, the deal envisions basically U.S. contractors coming to Ukraine or occupied territories and digging up this supposed wealth. Well, using those folks, those people as a human shield doesn't work. We saw what happened in Kuwait many, many years ago during the Gulf War, what happened there. They become targets. So, and then finally, from the Ukrainian side, there wasn't strong assurances from the U.S. side, which has to give something in return, of security guarantees. That's what Ukrainians want from anybody, from everybody, actually, security guarantees, because we saw what happened in the 1990s with that Budapest Memorandum, where it gave up its entire nuclear arsenal in exchange for guarantees guaranteed by Russia, United Kingdom, and U.S. And we saw what happened in the intervening years.
You say that the minerals deal could potentially have been too diluted for the Trump administration, but given that now Ukraine is on a weaker footing than it was on Friday morning, could the terms of the deal be changed more in Washington's favor now?
Well, I think the Ukrainians have gone as far as they can. There's a lot of skepticism here about that deal, fears that Ukraine could become the next Papua New Guinea, basically a economic colony of China, and a little bit Australia too. So, and going back a little bit, no one really talked about rare earth minerals before. It was when President Zelensky's team inserted it into the strength through peace type of proposal to Mr. Trump. But the other thing for the Americans, maybe they're becoming wiser and realizing that these minerals will take a long, long time to dig up. The monetary payback would not come during Mr. Trump's term. It would come far, far afterwards. So that would be a problem for them, too.
But, Michael, it's also Donald Trump seems to think that Vladimir Putin will not do anything as long as he is president, as long as Donald Trump is in office. He thinks he has a sort of respect or relationship with the Russian president. And also, if we look at actions taken from Washington, they want to reestablish bilateral ties with Moscow, even if it comes to lifting some sanctions down the line.
Yeah, well, there's no floor to Mr. Trump's subservience to Mr. Putin. In fact, there was a discussion on BBC Radio 5 today about, Mr. Trump's actions in regards to Mr. Putin and the concessions that the U.S. is offering. Russia is offering very few concessions. But there was talk in that program on whether the Russians have some kind of compromat or compromising material on Mr. Trump. I doubt it. But, as I wrote in a op-ed in Canada's national newspaper today, the Globe and Mail, I said, in the Kremlin right now, it must feel as if 10 Christmases have come all at once, because they're getting a lot in return for giving very little. For example, the restoration of normal diplomatic ties. There's now talk of sanctions being lifted. The U.S. has unilaterally and voluntarily suspended offensive cyber operations against Russia. There's even talk of flights being restored. And again, for them doing very little in return.
Indeed, that's what it seems like, Michael. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you very much.